with Sabado. Let's get going here. Let me wait until it. These live sessions are always kind of interesting because I never really know if it's working or not until people start to pop on. So I want to give it a couple of minutes so people have the opportunity to get on. And I know that I'm generally not doing live streams without some type of warning, but today it was important to get on because I think there's some things to talk about. But I'm gonna give it a few minutes here. I tried to start it earlier, and I was rambling to myself for about 10 minutes and realized that it was unlisted. But I think now we should be in a different place, which I think is good. So I see that I have some people popping on here, and I really want to talk a lot about today, and specifically about what's going on in the Middle East, because I think that as an early retiree, there are some real impacts, and I think there's a lot of concerns and consternation that sits out there as a result of the ongoing conflict. So my goal here is to provide good information. One of the things that's critically important to me as a steward of your time is that I provide good, accurate information from good sources. And so today I have a few good sources, or I have a really solid source that is going to help you better understand what's, not necessarily what's going on in the Middle East, because it's not that type of situation, but really understand some of the financial impacts, help us understand whether or not we should be um, panicking about what's going on, and maybe not necessarily what to expect, but to understand historically how things like this have impacted us in the past. Because I think history is a good predictor of the future, but I think it's important for our financial lives to understand, maybe from a broader perspective, some of what the impacts are, what we're seeing, whether it's in the markets, whether it's just from a geopolitical standpoint, the impact. I have opinions, and I try on this channel to share perspectives. I try not to share rabbit hole opinions because I don't think it's functional, and I don't think it really helps people that I share all of my opinions. But I am going to share with you some of what we're going to do. So today, I have about an 18-page report that I've skimmed through, and I've worked through and really pulled out the salient details that I want to talk about that are going to help you understand some of the financial impacts of what's going on in the world. So, I see there's people that are kind of popping in and popping out. So I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes because I do think there are some pretty important pieces of information out there. And not every piece of information is for every person. And I'm okay with that. And I don't expect everybody to be able to process all of this. But I do think a lot of us out there have questions about what's going on. And some of you out there, I'm sure, are saying, well, now that we have some volatility in the market, and there are some geopolitical things going on that are of real consequence, what's Sabado going to do about it? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what Sabado is going to do about it. But I do want to wait until we get a couple of people on, just to give people an opportunity to get going and to understand what we're talking about here. So I'm going to we're at about 4 minutes now, and I'm just going to give it a few more minutes before I get started, because I think these live episodes, for those of you that have been rocking with me for a while, know that I don't just drop a crazy episode on you for no reason. I usually advertise them, and I've done a couple of them, but this is something I think is really important, because as we go into the next week, there are things that are happening that are impacting all of us, and some of it we see, some of it we don't. I'm not going to go into political opinions. I'm not going to have political discussions here. I'm not going to talk about whether a person agrees or disagrees with what's going on, because I just don't think that's the game here. I think it's really about understanding, for those of us that are on this channel that are looking at trying to do things um, going forward, and retire, and look at finding financial independence. Things like this become a shock to the system. And I think it's really important for us to review the information and make our own opinions and make decisions that are in the best interest for us. I'm going to start by saying that none of what I'm going to talk about constitutes financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor, never played one on YouTube, never purported to be. But what I am is a guy that retired at 51, and I'm just an everyday guy that happened to make some good decisions. And there are more decisions that need to be made when you're in a climate that's as tumultuous as this. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to try to tell you that it's good, bad, or anything like that. I think that the one disclaimer that I do have is that in times like this, similar to what happened after 9/11, there were certain bits of animus that were waged against certain people. And my opinion is and continues to be that we all need to love each other. I don't care what you look like. I don't care what your religion is. I don't care what language you speak. I don't care if you're documented, undocumented. I think we all have a responsibility to love each other. And I'm not going to change that. So I'm not going to go into how I feel about it, because I also believe that there's a lot of information that's out there that perhaps we don't know. And so without complete sources of information, I'm not going to come here and try to tell you and dissuade you from that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to give you good information that talks about what's going on from a financial perspective. For those of you that are already retired, those of you that have retired back in the 2000s, I know, like my mom, for example, at one point told me her in 2007, her retirement accounts went down like 40%, and she was in panic. And then she came back, she recovered, and she's doing great now, and she's still retired. And I know a lot of us went through that. Some of us went through that with COVID, and a lot of us went through stuff with COVID and didn't have anybody to talk to. And as I've always mentioned, I'm the guy that's just going to give you the information straight up, no chaser. And my idea is that I'm a guy that you could talk to. I tell people on my chats with Sabado all the time that, I have a homie in Sabado that you can connect with, send emails to, and all of that. And I will make the document that I have available on my website so you can take a look at it in full. But I'm not going to go through a 16-page document on a live episode, because I just don't think it's going to do you any good. But I do thank you for the comment. It's always nice to have a nice comment from somebody, so I appreciate it. I just try to keep it real and give it to you straight, because I'm not trying to sell you anything. And I was telling somebody the other day, and I never make statements like this, but my idea is that I won the game, so I'm not trying to make any money off you. I've already done what I need to do, but I think there's information out there that had I not been given access to this information, I might have been in a difficult situation. I've had situations through all my life that are pieces of information that were unconventional at times that led me to where I am today. And I'm not going to litigate all that, because I know there's a lot that needs to be discussed today. So, thank you for thank you for Car Connections. I appreciate the comment. Again, sometimes when you're out here on camera and it's you by yourself, there's a little bit of a risk. But the fact that we have a few people on here today means that what we're doing is really a movement around helping normal people understand that extraordinary things are possible by just being normal and sticking to the plan. I do want to mention again that it's never my intention that everybody retires early, but I do want you to live your best life, and a lot of that is financial. And if you look at most reasons for the biggest reason for divorce and families having issues, a lot of times it's because of money. And so I want to help people understand a different way to perhaps understand looking at money. So I think we have a few people on here. I've been going on and rambling for about 10 minutes. And so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of move into what I have, because the stuff that we're going to talk about today is meaty. What I'm going to ask that you do is that if you'll see me do a couple of things that I don't normally do when I'm recording a video. You're going to see me looking off. This is to my right. You're going to see me looking off to my right. That's where I could see comments that come in. You're going to see me looking down, because I'm going to be going through some information today. But what I invite you to do is if you have questions, you put those questions in the comment section. I'm going to try, or in the chat section. I'm going to try to get to all of the comments, because I think it's not about what I convey. It's about what it means to you, and helping us at least be on the same page in terms of our shared understanding of what we're talking about. And there may be some things on here that I don't have my head completely around, but I'm going to try to stay away from those because I think one of the things that'll help you is understanding what is it that Sabado is going to do in light of all this. And I have some very specific things that we're taking a look at that we've started over time, but I want to help you there. So I want to talk about some of the financial information that came in a newsletter from my financial advisor. I get a weekly newsletter. It talks about the markets. It talks about what's going on politically and how things affect the markets and how things affect investments and some of their recommendations moving forward. I'm going to talk about, like I always do in every video, I'm going to talk about, how do I look at it? What do I see? What does it mean to me? So I think that, like, I'll give you an example of something I think is critically important is about 60% of the oil that comes through the Strait of Hormuz is being cut back right now. It's down about 60%, which impacts the global oil supply. So I think that's going to have some impact. Now, do I know exactly what that impact is going to be? No, because I'm not an economist, but I have information here that I'm going to share that's going to help on that. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I'm doing to deal with some of these, just from my own early retirement perspective, because I don't go to work tomorrow. I don't have an employer. I'm a guy that is relying largely on my equities, my investments, if you will, and a couple of other streams of income in order to make it go. And what we go and where we get the biggest bang for our buck in some of these is really going to be when it comes down to the idea of what I'm going to do. What is it that I'm doing? How am I managing it? How could other people manage it? And again, it never constitutes advice. I'm just a guy that has his own experience, and I'm sharing my experience with you because I think it's important. I know a lot of us don't have people that we even feel comfortable with talking about our financial situation, particularly if we're doing well. If we're doing horrible, then we're doing horrible, and it's easy. That's you're in the masses. But if you're a little bit beyond that, you don't want everybody knowing all your business. I mean, I'm the same way. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with some of the information that comes from, and I'm going to talk about some of the geopolitics and the labor data that came out this week because I think these tell a really strong story. And the goal here is to help you find some calm because there's a lot of stuff going on. So one of the things that there was what they called a perfect storm in the markets because you had the oil price hike that happened, you have the Iran concerns, and that created some real concerns over the increase of inflation. And we'll talk about some of the data that's going to be coming out this week as it relates to these economic numbers because it's going to be a big deal. And we have weak payrolls. Now, the payrolls are important because the job numbers came out and the job numbers were less than they expected. They were expected to be lower, but they were worse than expected. And we're going to talk about that in detail. And so when you start looking at all of these factors, there's what they call a stagflationary mix where prices go up but wages don't. So you have this things stay the same, but then because things become more important, you have a stagflation, and they say a lot of that is coming from the Fed's unwillingness to ease policy in the environment. And so we saw sell-offs. We are still the S&P is still about 17% over where it was last year, but it's still 3% below market high. So the market, although we had a couple of days of volatility, it wasn't crushed, but it was impacted. It was impacted enough for somebody like me to say, wait a minute, the Dow, the NASDAQ, the S&P 500 was down. What's the problem? And it seems that, and again, I'm reading some of this because I want to give it to you straight up, no chaser. I'm not, I don't want to act like I know everything, but that we may see further volatility in the coming days because of the way this Mideast conflict unfolds. It started with bombing Iran, then it went to a bunch of other countries. And so there's a bunch of other countries involved, and there's other countries that didn't necessarily want to or didn't plan to be in this conflict that are being impacted. You have impacts on civilians in different places. So there's a lot going on. So even this information that I'm sharing with you today, we're not necessarily going to have all of everything that's going to happen because it's continuing to unfold. This is one of the reasons I'm doing a live is because the situation changes so much. But and please, I want to know as we get through this, if this information is helpful for you, I can do a live episode about once a week and just talk about some of this information. And so the idea is, uh, my financial advisor and that group, they still feel constructive on the long term outlook, because when you look at the issues of growth and profitability, those still seem strong. But the indicators as they currently sit point to healthy U.S. and global economic activity, and that they say that from an oil price standpoint, it would take a sustained spike in order to derail the story. So what that means to me is that we have a situation, oil goes up because the supply is going down. It's all supply and demand, and how they price according to that supply and demand. Now, if this continues on for a long period of time, guess what happens? Now we have inflationary pressures. And again, folks, I'm going to get into this stuff because there's a lot of this stuff that has deep, deep roots to it that's going to affect every single one of you out there. So I want to make sure that each of you understand what that means. So just because we have this conversation today, don't take your eye on the ball. But the primary recommendation that came from my financial advising group, was that staying invested and well diversified, trying to weather this storm. Folks, it's not easy for anybody. And I'm not saying that it is. It's not easy for me. And I'm going to talk later about some of the adjustments that my wife and I are going to make in order to help do it. But, when you talk about fossil fuels and you talk about oil, it's more about, it's not all about 10 weight 13 oil in your gas in your car and the price of gas. Oil fuels manufacturing, oil fuels machinery, oil fuels all the stuff. And you look at the farmers who are already under price pressures. There's all of these different things that are impacted by the price of oil. So even though we have some conversation today that may ease some of your thoughts about what's going on and some of the opinions, don't take your eye off the ball, because this stuff is important. And I didn't realize how important it was until I really started doing the research. And one of the reasons I started doing the research is because I wanted to make sure that you folks out there had some good information to go on. So as you're talking to your friends, because a lot of your friends, I'm just telling you right now, when you start having this conversation, they're going to draw you into the political conversation. And this isn't about politics, folks. This is about your money. This is about your ability to find financial independence. And this is about your ability to live the life that you want to live, or your ability to, as I like to say, win the lottery. So the next section, they talk about, last week was a difficult time in the markets. Oil prices sparked more than 30%, or oil prices spiked more than 30% of the major equity markets were down about 2 to 5%. So that's not in correction territory, if I'm not mistaken. Again, please correct me if I misstate any of the economic detail in this, because I'm not an economist. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just giving you the information that has come to me that I think is important to share with the community. But it's not until you're down about 10% or so that you start looking at correction territory. But again, this isn't due to economic performance. It's due to a very specific instance, which I think is also important to note. And the international emerging markets even fell further, down 5%. And what's interesting is what I used to do when I invested is, when I started investing or putting money away in my 401k back in the 90s, what I would do is I would put, part of my money in domestic and part of my money in international, because generally in the past, back in the old days, if one was down, the other was up. That's not always the case now, because we've globalized our economy and everybody's affected by everything. And the 10-year bond yields jumped past 20 basis points. So that's, again, I'm not a big fan of, or nor do I understand the entire bond market, but it just has to do with the price that you paid for the yields and the cost that the bonds will sell for, and then that gives you the yield on those bonds. And so those yields jumped up, and I'm not exactly sure the drivers behind that in terms of what that means to each individual person, but I do think it's something that's important to, as you're doing your research, part of my goal is to just let you know these things exist. So when you're doing your own independent research, you're doing your independent research on concepts that you're actually going to find where places like the CME or the Fed or the economists are going to be using those same terms to help you understand what it is. And that's why I say I don't know all of the stuff, but now let me keep going. The other thing that was big this week, and this I think is a big, big, big indicator of where we're at. Headline payrolls fell by 92,000 in February, missing expectations. Now, follow what I'm saying here. Payrolls fell $92,000. Okay? Or 92,000, not $92,000, 92,000. And there's 92,000 fewer people working in February, missing the expectations. Now follow this, missing the expectations for a 55,000 gain in jobs over the past month. So we expected to gain as a global economy or as a nationwide economy, we expected to gain 55,000 jobs, but we lost 92,000 jobs. So that is a net. If you do 92,000 plus 55,000, that's about 150,000 plus jobs that we thought we were going to have that we didn't have. So that would be like saying, I thought I had $100 in savings, but I don't have $100 in savings. I actually have a minus 150 and I'm in debt, even though I thought I was going to have money in savings. That's what just happened. So it doesn't seem like when you look at 92,000 jobs and you look across the size of the economy in a company with 375 million people, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a huge swing. And and on top of this disappointment was a downward revision to the jobs numbers for January and December. So remember sometime back when I think it was in the summer when they were talking about the jobs numbers went down as a downward revision and there was all this hoopla about that. Well, that's a common practice. From what I understand, that's a common practice. Well, the jobs numbers now fell even further. And so they're revising them down. So no, in the past 3 months, the average gain in total payrolls over the past 3 months was just 6,000. And in the private sector at 18,000. So again, the numbers were bigger originally, and it's not because anybody's fudging numbers. It's because when you're dealing with averages, a lot of times you have to take an average based on what you have at the time. But as you continue to collect more data, you start to see a different number. And that's why they went down. And it's not because one person was trying to do one thing or another. But on the other side of all of this conversation, the advice is that it's not prudent to overreact because there's strike action, weather disruptions, and sometimes just from a strong January report. There's other things that impact the jobs reports besides the economy going to hell in a handbasket. Now, I will tell you that I've known some people that recently got layoff notices. So a lot of what we're talking about here are things that we're seeing in the community, particularly among white collar jobs, people that work in offices, managers, supervisors, and stuff like that. But again, I'm not going to say that that's all due to oil prices or any of that, because that's not what it's all about. But these are things that we're keeping an eye on. And then the other piece of that, now something else to consider, is that given the aging U.S. population and lower net migration, it takes fewer jobs each month to keep the labor market ticking along. So one of the things that used to really surprise me when I was younger is I would always look at the economic numbers. And folks, I'm not going to sit here and say I understood all of the economic numbers, but I would look at the economic numbers and they would always say during bad economic times, because I went through a lot of recessions, the recession in '89, the recession in 2000, which I was a victim of, the recession of 2008, the mini recession of 2020. So I've been through a lot of recessions, and when I look at these recessions, the one thing that always didn't make sense to me until I started working in business at a higher level and looking at the data and looking at metrics is that during recessions when people are getting laid off, productivity went up. But when you look at how productivity is calculated, basically what you're doing is you're doing more with less. So because and one of the things that we used to talk about in HR was that after the baby boomers start to retire, then the Gen X, Gen Y, the millennials are having fewer kids. It's well documented. And so there's going to be fewer people in the labor market. So the question that I was always trying to solve for is can we redesign jobs so that way we could continue to provide opportunities for people that are aging in the workplace? Well, what we're finding is that we're in a situation that we're able to do more with less because of the aging population and a lower net migration. So there's impacts on all of that, and it's and the unemployment rate it only went up a little bit. Now, unemployment going up at all is bad. Anybody without a job, that's a bad situation. I feel bad because I've been there. I was out of a job for 11 months once after getting laid off, and it was probably one of the worst times. No, not probably. It was one of the worst times of my life. It was the worst time of my life because as a person, and many of you out there, particularly those of you in Gen X, we started working at 12 years old because we had to. We didn't work at 12 years old because we wanted to. It's because our parents didn't have the money to give us stuff, and we wanted to cash the ice cream man and go to the ice cream store, go buy some candy at Payless or whatever, because Payless used to be a store like CVS. Now it's a shoe store. So I'm not saying you buy candy at a shoe store. I just want to keep it a buck with you there. But once our parents didn't have money for that, and both of our parents were working, and so we started working, throwing papers and stuff at 12 years old. At least I did, and we kind of kept going from there. But when I was a kid, when I was younger, we would always look at, and it's still in my mind that when I start thinking of bad unemployment, I start thinking 5%. It's ticking up, but these all have other impacts. We talk about the Fed. See, remember when there's high inflation, the Fed raises interest rates to slow down the economy. When inflation is low and they want to stimulate the economy, they lower interest rates. And so we talk a lot about raising and lowering interest rates. And folks, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. But we talk about raising and lowering interest rates. Let me tell you something. Let me learn you something. When you talk about raising and lowering interest rates, that's something that a lot of times is already priced in. I have a buddy of mine who does mortgages, and he was saying they already priced those things in, but a lot of times it's based on kind of how the markets are. Right now, there's a lot of conversation about wanting the Fed to lower interest rates, but when you have inflation that's going up, or you have stagflation, when you have higher unemployment rates, guess what happens? They don't want to. They're not going to lower the interest rates because they don't want inflation to go up. Because if more people can buy stuff, guess what happens? Then the prices go up because there's a higher demand for things in our supply. If everybody's broke, guess what? Now you don't raise prices because then nobody can afford it. But if everybody can afford it, guess what you do? You raise prices. Sounds kind of counterintuitive, but that's just how it works. Does it make sense all the way around? It makes sense somewhere. I don't know where. I'm not going to speculate because this isn't about speculation. This is about giving you some facts. So so the markets just didn't like the report, and there's a few reasons that they cite is that there's sluggish momentum, and that makes the economy vulnerable should layoffs start to rise. And again, people are losing their jobs. The reality is people are losing their jobs. My best friend just called me the other day. I'm losing my job. Other companies, you talk to people, still losing their jobs. And I, most of my audience here, you folks are Gen X, so you're sitting in the 40 to 55 range, 40 to 60, and you know how it is trying to get a job when you're 50 years old, 55 years old. It's hard out there for a player because, everybody wants to either pay less because there's less in terms of oh, I see I have some comments. Thank you, Shelly Patton 7052. The Okay, just a couple comments. So sorry about that, folks. Um, but the um, but the it's hard to find a job when you lose your job. So, a lot of younger people that are still being viewed as having a lot of runway ahead of them, well, guess what? That it may not be as hard for them, but once you hit about 45, 50, the landscape changes unless you're in like real senior executive level experience driven positions. And even then, it's difficult because the way we move and the way the generations behind us move might be a little bit different. And so they want people that are going to be able to lead the new generation. So that's why that becomes important. And then the second piece is that an improvement in hiring trends this year is likely needed to underpin consumer spending. One of the biggest drivers of our economy is consumer spending. The economy is considered strong when people are spending money. So I don't know if you remember a couple years ago, they were talking about the economy strong, the economy's good. Well, it's because people were buying money or spending money. That's why you have things like economic stimulus and things like that. And that's another reason you have lower interest rates, because you lower the interest rates. Now the cost of borrowing money is less. So instead of spending 8% on a car, you're only spending 3%. And so that car is going to cost you significantly less. And normally a weak payroll report would bolster the expectations for Fed cuts, but because we have oil prices that are spiking, that complicates things, because now what's happening is you're not going to have, there's just this whole geopolitical thing that's creating a challenge. And so again, as you're doing your own, I never give you I don't say I know all the information. I don't say I advise in one way or another, but I just want to give you the information. So as you do your own research and you do your own investigation, you could say, well, Sabado mentioned this. What does that really mean? And again, if I'm wrong or I give you something that doesn't jive with you, put a question in this is going to be posted afterwards too. So put a question in the comments, see what you got. But again, these are things that it's important, because unless somebody talks to us about it and it's somebody that we trust, and fortunately, I've been blessed enough to have a community of people that trust me, and I take that responsibility incredibly seriously, because it's hard enough to get good information because it comes from so many sources. And so I take that responsibility seriously, which is why I'm not here giving you my opinions. I'm giving you maybe the opinions of experts and stuff that you can go and verify. And then I'm going to also put this up on my website, which you could find at www.asksabado.com. So then you can take a look at it and truly understand what's being said. And if you disagree, then you always have an opportunity to come back with me. And then if I have to do a retraction of sorts, then I'll do it. I mean, there's no ego here. I'm just trying to help a brother and sister out. I'm just trying to share information, because I know a lot of us have other things to do. So the next piece I want to talk a little bit about is the global energy shock. And oil price shocks have proved dangerous for economies in the past, particularly for those in Gen X. You might remember that in the 70s or in the 90s, they were accompanied by recessions, and you had the oil crisis, and there were a bunch of things that happened. So the oil price hikes are a thing that you really have to pay attention to. You really have to pay attention to this, because if you don't pay attention to this, it catches you by surprise. And if you're caught by surprise, then you're going to be frustrated, because you're saying, I wish I would have paid attention to what was going on. And you want to plan for it. And again, there's some specific things that my wife and I are doing to impact this, maybe a little bit preemptive or proactively, but they're things that are going to help our situation longer term. Because one of the things that doesn't work, particularly when you're in retirement, thinking about retirement, planning for retirement, have a retirement plan, and and especially if you've given notice, is you don't want to have too much volatility in your own personal economy, and you want to plan for things that happen, because planning becomes incredibly crucial during that time. But the one thing that they do say is that it would take a large and sustained rise in oil prices to derail the U.S. economy. And there's some tests that are out there, and so I'm just going to give you some economic tests, and you may hear about these on the news, because there are some economic tests that were Shelly Patton being able to get your so and it's hard for me to read the comments as I'm going, so I'm not dismissing Shelly. So Shelly, keep the comments coming. Thank you, I appreciate it. But the there's some tests that are going on, and you may hear about this. So I want to give just to understand the impact. So we talk about in your retirement, they stress test your retirement plan, and a financial advisor stress test your retirement plan with 1,000 market scenarios to see if you're going to be successful in your retirement. Well, there are oil economists that are doing tests and modeling the risk of a downturn given oil prices. So here's what they say, and again, this is not advice, but these are things so that way when you're driving to work or when you're listening to somebody talk, they may make sense to you, but they're going to give you some idea of how to process the information without going into panic mode. Because the worst thing you can do is scream fire in a packed elevator, because even if there is no fire, there's a chance that somebody dies because people are going to try to rush out of the elevator and panic. So this is not. But they said with oil trading around $90 per barrel, the model points to a 15% chance of a recession in the near term. Okay? So right now they're at about $90 a barrel. They say there's about a 15% chance of recession. Then it says up just 6 points after the last week's oil spike. All right, so now it's up about 6 points. It was 9 points before, but at the $90 a barrel, there's about a 15% chance of a recession in the near term. Should oil prices rise further to $125 per barrel, the risk rises to 30%. Now, that becomes a 30. Now, this isn't to create fear, but the one thing, if you've been rocking with me for a while, you know that it's how much I say it is important to plan. You have to plan. And we can hide under a rock and hope everything gets better. And that doesn't mean that what's happening around you isn't happening. It just means that you don't know about it, and then your ability to adjust is going to come later rather than sooner. That's just the way life is. We're all grown here, so I'm just keeping it a buck with you because that's what I do. Now, while it would take a spike in prices to $150 per barrel to reach the 50% mark. So if oil prices reach $150 a barrel, now they're at 90 now, but if they reach $150 a barrel, now the economists based on these models are saying there might be a 50% chance of a recession. Now, here's something else that I don't hear anybody talking about, but this is what I think. I'm going to share an opinion, and this is an opinion that may make sense, it may not make sense. So I think about 20% of our oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz, which sits between Saudi Arabia, that Qatar and Iran area. So it comes down, kind of dips up, and then comes down. And that's a huge, huge transportation route in the Middle East. And if Qatar and Iran start going into war, then that will essentially bring the movement of those tanker ships and those cargo ships through Qatar a lot lower than they are right now. So if they're already down 60%, and this is well documented, so all this stuff is well documented, look it up. But if it goes down even further and you start to stymie oil production even further, then when you look at the forces of supply and demand, I think that has the potential to significantly impact oil prices even further. So I say all this to say that's why it's so important not to dismiss this information as stuff that doesn't impact you, because there's a lot of people, and I know a lot of you out there are self-employed doing your own thing, but even the oil for mechanical parts, I mean, even you start looking at things like the oil for manufacturing these iPhones. You start looking at the oil that you use at your house. I mean, I don't think people really use that 4-in-1 oil anymore, but the stuff you use for your garage doors, all of that stuff is impacted. oil goes into every other place that you could think. So when you start thinking about where we use oil and why oil is so important, and once the underlying price of things goes up, we always talk about, when I was in HR, we would always talk about unintended consequences. So a lot of times you can do something and it seems innocuous, but then it has these downstream impacts that are really big. And so we would always try to understand the unintended consequence down the road. Well, there are unintended consequences, or there are downstream effects of a significant change in oil prices. And so if oil prices continue to rise, it doesn't just affect you at the gas pump. And we're tricked into thinking that it just affects you at the gas pump, but it doesn't just affect you at the gas pump. It affects you in other places too. It affects you in your entire life. And so we talk about the dependence on foreign oil, and yeah, there's vegetable oils and stuff like that, but there are also issues of viscosity and how it breaks down, and the challenge of stuff. And and it's funny because I used to have these comments with my with friends of mine that had my straight-haired friends, and I would always say, the ozone layer, climate change is happening because all the hair bears used to use hairspray in the 80s, and it messed up the ozone layer. And people would tell me that, well, but those fossil fuels in your stay soft row are all fossil fuels, and that's having an impact as well. And I used to laugh and kind of blow it off, but it was kind of our funny way of saying that this stuff is serious. And whether you believe in climate change or not, it's hotter, the glaciers are melting, sea levels rising, and things are happening across the world. Again, I'm not getting political about it because I know a lot of people do, but sometimes you can politicize bad news as much as you want, but the news is the news. And I'm a guy that believes in science. I'm a science guy. And in my next video, I'm going to talk about how one of the things I'm doing is I'm going back to school as a retiree to start learning some physics, because I want to understand how things happen at the micro level and why things happen, so I can tie that back into helping us all kind of understand the world in a different place. Why am I doing it? Because I'm that guy. I like fact. I don't have time for bullshit. And I like to make sure that people have good information, because I think it's important to have good information from people that are in the spot, as opposed to people that are dreaming about what it would be like and telling you what you need to do. Whole nother conversation. So in the big picture, they believe there's an increased risk of volatility in the coming weeks, because there's not only what's actually happening, but there's also the just people digesting it. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that insurance companies, one of the ways insurance companies insure future claims is by investing. So a lot of times when you see shifts in the market, Dow up, Dow down, there'll be some type of actuarial calculation from a market predictive modeling that determines that this thing here may have an impact on this. And so those institutional investors pull out of the market. It creates it could create some volatility. So there's going to be volatility in the future, potential volatility in the future, which could be up or down. But according to my financial advisor group, they have a constructive outlook on what's going forward. Now, I think these words are always kind of interesting, a constructive outlook, but they're looking at kind of the soup to nuts of it, saying, corporate profitability, it's been rising. A lot of the tax cuts, whether you agree with the tax cut bill or not, and I'm agnostic to having that conversation, so I'm not going to go there, but the tax cuts are starting to kind of make their way through organizations and through companies. And that's turning into corporate profits. Now, does that fuel corporate greed? There's a whole social conversation about that. Again, that's not the case here. That's not the reason for this conversation. This conversation is just to let you know and be aware based on stuff that I'm hearing from experts, not from my own perspective, not from what somebody told me, not from what some YouTuber who's an end of the world apocalyptic YouTuber is telling me. This is just stuff from where it is. So it's always, everything you get from me, and as you should already know, is already balanced. So I won't even go down that path any further. And that AI investment still remains a tailwind. They're talking about AI, but people are still putting money in AI. Nvidia's still making money. Google. I think about AI and some of this conversation. And I'll tell you a funny story. When I was when I was 16 years old, I used to work at Great America, which is an amusement park. And I worked there, and I was kind of a nerdy kid, kind of a geeky kid, didn't have a lot of game, whatever. So there was this lady or a girl at the time. Her name's Bessie, and Bessie's dad worked at the New United Motors plant, and they built Toyota automobiles. And this is in the '80s. Everybody was talking about the idea that robots were going to take people's jobs, and so she was really concerned because she didn't want her dad to lose his job and all of that. So I turned around to her and said to her that you know, the robots may take jobs, but you're going to need to have people that take care of the robots. And she looked at me, and I think it was the first time that a girl that I ever liked turned around and called me smart. And folks, I take smart over good looking every day. Now, again, I'm not saying I'm good looking. Everybody says that, but what I'm saying is, I'd rather be known for my intelligence than how I look because I could stick with that. I can have the conversation. I can be that all the time, regardless of what happens. Because you could put a cut on my face and mess me up, but you can't take what's inside the chrome dome here. Not exactly chrome, but the melanated chrome dome. We'll just say that. Um, but AI is not going away, and when you look at the impact of AI, do a Google search, get an Amazon Alexa, go to Amazon et al. And see it's all around AI. Now I have a feeling that my thing is going to go off, so if it does, I'm just going to keep going and some of that. But so it's still a tailwind, it's still going, and it's taking on. But there is a risk. A prolonged geopolitical conflict could leave a bigger imprint and on the economies and the markets. So if this war continues on, it can have a broader impact because this is a large crude oil producing region. And if you impact the ability to get product out, then we have to go to other places. And I know inevitably, whether it's on this live episode or someplace else, somebody's going to say that, well, there's enough oil off the coast of such and such. Granted. But you know what? There's a reason that those things don't happen, and it's not as easy as just flipping a switch. Most things aren't as easy as flipping a switch because, again, the idea isn't to try to to convince you of anything. The idea is that in the short term, there's an impact. A lot of us are saying, you can get rich tomorrow, but I'm not worried about tomorrow. I'm worried about today. I got to feed my family. I got to pay my mortgage. I got to do the things that I need to do. I got to eat. And so there's a chance there. And historically, these types of shocks, the oil price shocks, they've been short lived. And so for long-term investors, staying invested through disruptions have provided the best strategy. And we think that's the case moving forward. And that investors should target well-diversified portfolios to help spread risk and tap into broadening and market leadership that had been emerging before this shock. So the last thing I'll talk about before I get into what my wife and I are doing, because I think that becomes another piece. It's like, Sabado, this is all good information, but what are you guys doing? I'm going to talk about that, but I want to just give you that for the week. The Dow Jones was down 3%. S&P 500 was down 2%. NASDAQ was down 1.2%. But for year to date, the NASDAQ's down 3.7%, and the NASDAQ is largely tech stocks. So that's pretty significant because a lot of portfolios have the Meta, the Google, and all that, and the Apple in there. The S&P 500 for year to date is down 1.5%. And again, it's still early in the year, and these are averages. And the Dow Jones Industrials is down 1.2%. So before I get in, and the last thing is that this week coming up is there's going to be some really important information, there's going to be some important inflation numbers that come out. Pay attention to that because that's going to give you an idea of how much more it's going to cost for milk, cheese, and bread, stuff like that. There's going to be information on the housing data, and a lot of these, what they call in economic circles, are economic indicators, because if people are finding it harder to live their life, then it's harder for them to pay their mortgages and harder for them to buy houses. So those things all kind of play a role. And then they'll talk about GDP, which really equates to the growth of the country over time. So if these types of updates are helpful for you, please let me know in the comments. If I don't hear anything in the comments, then I won't do them anymore because I don't want to waste your time, because time is our most valuable resource and I don't want to waste anybody's time. But I do want to bring these things to you because I've been thinking about it for some time, and I do want to bring them to you if you find them valuable. And again, you'll find them on the website on www.asksabado.com. And it's an 18-page report. I didn't go through it all because I respect your time. I know you got other things to do, but with your time, but you're here with me, and I appreciate that. But now I want to talk a little bit about what my wife and I are going to do. One of the things that I always ask myself and my financial advisor is I say, is this a time to panic? And the answer is what we're not going to do at this time is we're not going to panic. And the reason we're not going to panic and we're not going to go out and sell a bunch of stuff and do a bunch of changes is because right now, when you look at companies are strong, profits are good, and the underlying fundamentals are good, then it's just a matter of time until the conflict resolves itself. Now, if we go into a full everything goes to hell in a handbasket, then it's not going to make a difference anyway. Always keep that in perspective. If Google, Meta, all of those companies, Apple, Nvidia, whatever company, GM, if they all close down, then it's not going to matter anyway because that's going to impact the entire market. It's going to impact the entire financial system, and everything's going to crash and blow up. But as long as the fundamentals, underlying fundamentals, still have some strength to them, then it's not time to panic. So we're going to keep all of those things there. One of the big things that we started talking about is we've been talking about what can we do to decrease our, and by the way, folks, if you have any questions, ask them in the comments because I'm here for you, not so I could just ramble on, just for the record here. And I see comments from Shelly Patton. I see Yvonne. So Yvonne, hello. I just saw your comment, so I'm sorry if that was later. But if you have questions, let me know. But one of the things that my wife and I are focusing on is we're focusing on reducing our dependence on foreign oil. Now, how do you do that? I'm not using Stay Softro anymore, so I'm not using the fossil fuels. I'm just kidding. But one of the things that I am going to do is I'm looking at getting out of my gas car, my SUV, and getting into an electric car, just so I could use a renewable energy source as a way to fuel. Because one of the things that becomes critically important and expensive is the cost of gas. And folks, say what you want to say, but I live in California, and in California, we have an infrastructure that's fairly well established from an electric charging perspective. And in fact, what I've been finding, because we're taking a trip out to Kansas in a few weeks, is that the infrastructure for electric vehicles has opened up quite a bit, and it's becoming fairly well established between Tesla, EVgo, and some of these other places. So you could generally get across the country using the electric charging. I'm not selling you on it, but I'm trying to make sure that I explain to you what we're doing, because my wife already has an electric car, and then I'm going to get myself an electric car, probably just a small, little, inexpensive joint that's going to get me from point A to point B, because we have her car that takes us on longer trips with more range. But then I'm not as my financial situation doesn't fluctuate as much from the change of gas prices, because when you look at gas prices, and a lot of us out there that are, and again, it's not about people that are retired. It's just about living our best life. It's never my expectation that everybody retire early. It's my expectation that you live your best life, and I'm just trying to help you with some perspective around your financial life, because I'm not a financial advisor, and that's why I don't give advice. But my, if you have a budget of, let's say, $10 or $100 a month or whatever for, and I know $100 is low, but I'm just saying for a round number. But if you have a budget of $100 a month for food, and then all of a sudden you're paying $30 a month more for gas, well, then you cut into your food budget. And those are the types of concerns that people have to deal with on a real basis every day. People have to make those decisions. And the more complex our society gets, the more people are in situations where they're inclined to make those types of decisions. So the idea for us is not just not paying for gas, but then there's the oil, there's the maintenance. The more mechanical pieces you have, and anybody that's out there that's in manufacturing knows, the more mechanical pieces that you have, the more chances there are for failure. And most of those mechanical pieces are cooled, particularly in a combustion engine, by oil. And so if we could reduce our dependence on oil, then it helps us better manage our budget, because we don't have, as a retired person, my wife doesn't have the ability to do a bunch of, unnecessary fluctuations. So we're going to do that. From an investment perspective, we're just going to stay where we're at. we're not going to move. There have been a few things that had happened, and I'll be very specific about some things that have happened. When we had COVID, the markets dipped, looked like everything was going to go to hell in a handbasket. I called my financial advisor. He says, this would be a good time to buy some stuff because, again, it's an event that's causing a dip in the market. So it makes sense for us to maybe buy a couple stocks. And since then, those stocks have made us like $40,000. And I only spent like 20 something $1,000 on them. So you got stocks with dividends and some of that, which is another reason why I suggest that you get a financial advisor somewhere and you have somebody look at your plan because they understand how money works. And as much as we think we do from watching YouTube videos, we don't know jack because the financial system is so complicated. It's complex. There's ways to make money in down markets that most people don't know about. And you don't save money by putting money in your mattress. The other thing we're not going to do, let me back up. So then the other thing we had recently is we had, I think it was back in April when there was a talk of tariffs and the market tanked. It was the same thing. Hold on because this is an event. Events are generally short-lived. And then once this resolves itself, you'll be in good shape. And through the course of 2025, the markets recovered and we ended up in a better place. So I'm going to hold. And the only thing that we did do is because of the Fed at the time moving money into or looking at lowering interest rates, then we knew that our high limit savings account wasn't going to pay the same interest going forward than it was before as it happened. So then we moved into another investment. We did some municipal bonds so that way we could get some tax relief from our savings. It's not getting tax relief from our investments because you still have to pay taxes on that based on whatever the law is in your state and in the federal law. But in terms of just on the dividends and stuff, so that way if we needed it, it's liquid and we don't pay taxes. Or if we lose money, we could write off on our taxes and reduce our tax bill. And so when we get to 2026 and everything we're dealing with right now, the idea is trying to make sure that we just stay the course, and we are going to manage our expenses. We're not going to spend as much. Many of you probably know that I've actually kind of cut back on golf because of my back, which was costing me some money. It's in our retirement budget, but it cost me some money, but it may help me offset some things. And then what's nice is my car still has some value. So what I'll be able to do is when I get a new car, I could sell my car, offset the cost of a new car, and not have much that I have to pay on that out of it, and then not have the ongoing maintenance and stuff like that. And then just continuing to take care of my health. One of the things that I'm proud to say that I've lost a lot of weight. I've gotten down from about 276 pounds. I'm at 232 pounds now. It's hard to tell because I wear a lot of the same shirts because I'm just not going to go out and buy a new wardrobe. It's for what? Who am I trying to impress? But working on my health and all my levels are in the normal range. Things are happening. I did have a little bout with shingles, but that's all done and dusted. But again, I think that if I do those things and I manage the situation, then I'm going to be okay. So I think one of the things that I would take a look at if I were any of you is to just think about what are the things that I'm spending money on that I don't really need to spend money on. What are those subscriptions that I don't use? It's funny. I had a subscription to some channel one time and I just wasn't using it. I wasn't watching the channel because I didn't like what they showed. So I just didn't watch it. But I was paying like $9.99 a month. Not that much, but it's $108 a year or $120 a year. I mean, you can do 99 cents and do the math, but I'm not that. I haven't taken my physics class yet. But just try to focus on that, because if you're healthy, then you're not spending money on medical bills. If you're managing your expenses, then you're doing what you can. And then if you have a delta, that delta is based on real stuff as opposed to stuff that you don't need to spend money on, because there's nothing worse than planning around. There's nothing worse than planning around a budget that's unnecessary to find out you didn't have to do that extra thing, take that extra job, drive Uber or whatever the case is, because you didn't do the analysis. So the idea is to do the analysis. So I have a question that came in from Yvonne. Hey, what's happening, Yvonne? Thank you for joining the live. I don't do many lives and I don't do many emergency lives, and I know that it's tough sometimes for people to jump on. So I appreciate you jumping on, and I feel like who's my next caller? No, I'm just kidding. But The question is, do you have a financial advisor firm that you recommend, and does yours work on a fee or percentage basis? So yes, I do have a financial advisor. And what I will do is I would ask that you do me a favor, Yvonne, is go to www.asksabado.com or send me an email at sabado at asksabado.com, and then I'll send you back the information. The reason I'm doing that is because I never want to give the impression I'm trying to sell people stuff, because it's just not what I do. Like I said before, I'm not trying to make money off you folks. I'm just giving you information because I wish there's information I have now that I wish I would have had when I was sooner, so I'd be in a better situation I am now. Not that I'm in a bad situation, but it's all about being in a better situation. Um, but we do have a financial advisor, and they have a couple of different ways that they can service you. Some of it is on a fee basis, some of it is on an assets under management basis. What we chose is we chose assets under management because what works for us is the peace of mind. There is nothing worse than not having a peace of mind. And a lot of times, and different companies operate differently. Some of them, they do a great job of having all the tools and resources, but when you call somebody, you get a different person every time. I don't want to talk to a different person every time. I want to talk to the same person. I want to be able to send them a text. I want to be able to verify information with them. A lot of times when we're on the channel and I'm having conversations, and I know you folks are like, yeah, Sabado's off the hook. But I contact him and verify information that I share with you because I want to use, because I have the opportunity to use this cat, I want to make sure I use that information to come to you. Just like in the video I had the insurance guy the other day, last week. So check that video out because it's a real baseline conversation about finance and trying to build communities with better financial acumen. So we did assets under management because here's my idea is I believe that in the concept of jumping over pennies for dollars. And so if I pay 1% of my portfolio value, but I make 10%, or this last year, let's say it's like 20%, so I make 20%, then it's worth it for me to do it because then I don't run the risk of not getting what I can as a result of that. And one of the things that my financial advisor is very good at is making sure that the numbers that are communicated to me aren't gross numbers. They're not numbers based on what he got us before his fees. His numbers that come back to us as percentages are after his fees. I'll give you an example why I think why this works for me. Many of you know, and if I were to turn this camera around, you'd see a bunch of records and you see a turntable and a piano. I used to DJ. So I was a DJ and I was pretty good, I guess. People would hire me. And I used to work a lot in San Francisco at the clubs. And, I work with a lot of jazz bands. So people like Omar Sosa and the Pete Escovedo All-Stars. I do gigs where they were at. I do a bunch of stuff. It was cool. Well, I had this agent. Her name was Kate. And so Kate would pay me. I'd get like a couple $1,000, $1,000, $1,500 a gig, which is significantly more than what I was getting doing the gigs on my own. So one day I go to Kate and I said, Kate, how do you get paid doing this? Because we never had that conversation. And I said, how do you get paid? She says, well, when I book a gig for you, I tell the manager about 10% more than what I'm paying you, or I think it's 10 or 20% more. I take mine off the top and then give the rest to you. And I said, that makes sense because, yeah, I could say I want to go out and get 20% more, but guess what? On my own, I wasn't getting 20% more. And so I figured if it costs me a little bit of money for me to have my peace of mind, if it costs me a little bit more money for me to be able to have control of my time, guess what? I'm good. I'm not going to sit here because otherwise it's like I could build a shed on my own, but now I got to spend 2 weeks trying to figure it out and another 3 weeks fixing what I screwed up. So that's why we go with assets under management. But some people, depending on what your needs are, if you want an ongoing relationship or if it's a one-time deal, you might be able to get away with a fee base. But again, it really comes down to what works best for you. And I'm not in the position to tell anybody what to do, but I can tell you what I did. So thank you for the question, Yvonne. That's the answer. Are there any other questions? And I'm gonna give it about 30 seconds here, and if not, because I know we've been on for a while, and I know some of you are probably watching me in the background and hearing me in the background, which is great. But I'm gonna give it about 30 seconds, and if there's no more questions that come in, if there's questions, I'll stay here all day until I get questions. until all the questions are answered. But if there's no more questions, then I'm gonna cut it out. So I got we'll start the 30 seconds here in about 7 seconds, so that way it's at an even time. So anyway, but folks, I do want to mention to you that it's never my expectation. I know these retirement channels, we talk about retirement because I know that's what a lot of people want to do. But the idea is, it's never about everybody retiring early. That's not the name of the game for me. It's about people living their best life. Because, folks, before a certain point in my life, I was just broke. I was broker than the Joker, and it wasn't even funny. And I know what that's like, and I want to help people. And once I organized things, I realized that I was in a better spot than I thought it was. So it appears, though, that there are no more questions. So I want to take this moment to, thank all of you for taking time out of your schedules. I know you could have been anywhere else in the world right now, but you're here with me. I appreciate that. This video is going to be up in a few minutes, and I'm going to call it now and perhaps do a different video. So, pay attention to the stuff that's going on in the news. If you have any questions, and please let me know if this type of information is useful, because if it is, I will continue to do these types of things, because I think it's important to, particularly in times like this, because I think besides inspiring people, I think we all on YouTube have a responsibility to try to help our communities with good information. So on that note, I will bid you adieu. So have a good rest of your day, and I will talk to you soon.